The bell above the bakery door chimed, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. It was late afternoon, the golden light slanting through the window and painting the rows of pastries in a warm, honeyed glow. The last of the day's customers had just left, and the air was settling, thick with the scent of sugar, yeast, and peace. I stood behind the counter, wiping flour from my hands onto my old apron. I looked out at the quiet street. The same street where, not so long ago, flashing lights and scandal had held a morbid carnival. Now, it was just a street again. Life, stubborn and ordinary, had reasserted itself. Daniel emerged from the back, a clipboard in his hand. He'd put on a little weight, the hollows in his cheeks filling out. The shadows under his eyes were lighter. Inventory's done, Mom. We're low on vanilla extract. I'll order some tomorrow. Thank you, Mijo, I said, my voice soft. The simple rhythm of our new life, the orders, the inventory, the shared meals, was a balm. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was an honest one, built on the rubble of the old. The scandal had raged like a brushfire and then burned itself out. Julian and Allison had become a lurid local footnote, a story people told with a shake of the head before moving on to fresher gossip. They'd signed the divorce papers, of course. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the photos, the audio, the very public humiliation, Julian had no fight left. He'd moved to a town 2 hours away. Allison had disappeared entirely, her name a bitter taste that was slowly fading. We never spoke of the mustard in the hospital, or the superglue, or the orchestrated smoke. Those were my secret weapons, buried now. Daniel had his suspicions, I'm sure. But he never asked. Some truths are too sharp to hold. We had a silent pact to build forward, not to dissect the ruins. One evening, as we closed up, Daniel lingered by the door. Mom, I've been thinking about the space next door. The hardware store that closed. I looked at him, curious. What about it? We could expand, he said, a tentative spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Not just the bakery. A small cafe. Tables. Good coffee. A place for people to sit. You could teach a baking class on weekday mornings. He spoke quickly, the idea tumbling out. We could call it Juliet's Hearth. Juliet's Hearth. The name settled over me like a warm shawl. It spoke of warmth, of sustenance, of a center. Not just a business, but a home for others. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of a fierce, blooming hope. You've been thinking a lot. I have, he said, meeting my gaze. I can't change what happened, but I can help us build something new. Something that's just ours. I walked around the counter and took his face in my flour-dusted hands. It's a beautiful idea. The expansion became our shared project. It was hard work, negotiating the lease, dealing with contractors, choosing paint colors. But it was a clean, hard work. We argued about light fixtures and laughed over disastrous paint samples. With every decision, we were laying down new stones, not on a foundation of lies, but on one of mutual survival and slowly returning trust. The day we opened Juliet's Hearth, the bakery-turned-cafe was full. Not with the gawking curiosity of the scandal days, but with genuine warmth. Mrs. Peterson and her book club took the big table by the window. A young couple cooed over their baby in a corner. The air hummed with the sound of the new espresso machine and low, happy conversation. I stood behind the refurbished counter, now twice as long, watching Daniel move among the tables, refilling coffee cups with an ease that looked like healing. He caught my eye and smiled, a real unguarded smile that reached his eyes. A woman approached the counter, someone I didn't recognize. You must be Juliet, she said. I've heard about your flan for weeks. I had to come see the legend for myself. I handed her a plate, the caramel shimmering on top. The legend is just a woman who knows how to get back up, I said. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. The best kind of legend. Later, as the sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Daniel and I sat at the last empty table, sharing a slice of the celebratory cake. The cafe was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of a job well done. "We did good, Mom," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did," I agreed. I looked around Juliet's hearth. At the warm light on the walls we'd painted together. At the ovens that had been my silent partners through joy and devastation. At my son who had walked through fire, literal and figurative, and emerged, scarred but standing tall beside me. The revenge had been cold, strategic, and necessary. It had cleared the poisoned ground. But this slow, deliberate building, this quiet companionship with my son, this creation of a space that offered simple sweetness to the world, this was the victory. It wasn't about winning against Julian and Allison. It was about winning back myself, and forging a future from the pieces they'd left behind. I took a bite of the cake. It was sweet, but not cloying. Rich but honest. A perfect balance, like the peace I had finally found. The story of the betrayed baker wife was over. Now began the story of Juliet, the woman who owned her own hearth. And it was a story I was finally ready to live. "We just want to take care of you, Mom." Charles's words hung in the air of my quiet living room, slick as oil. His smile didn't reach his eyes. They held a different calculation now, not just impatience, but a proprietary gleam, as if he were already counting the insurance payout. I clutched Ernest's letter in my pocket, the paper a tiny, secret shield against the chill. "That's very thoughtful, Charles," I said, keeping my voice a careful monotone. "But I think I'd like to manage Ernest's legacy myself. For now." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, quickly smoothed away. "Of course, Mom. No pressure. Just know we're here. Henry and I." After he left, the silence in the house was deafening, filled with the ghosts of his unspoken plans. I went to the small hall closet and pulled out Ernest's old toolbox. Not the one from the shop, but his personal kit, the one he kept for household fixes. Taped inside the lid, where he'd always kept a spare house key, was a small black flip phone. An antique. Ernest hated modern phones, but he'd bought this one years ago for emergencies, saying, "A simple tool for a simple job." He'd shown it to me once, laughing at its size. My hands shook as I turned it on. The battery was low, but it powered up. There was only one number saved in its contacts, M. And there were sent messages. Dozens of them, all to my number. Messages I had never received. They started 3 months ago. C&H here again. Talking insurance. Don't like it. Be careful, my love. Signed papers today. Felt wrong. They rushed me. Withdrew money. Charles said for taxes. Doesn't add up. They asked about the shop deed. Said it's for estate planning. My heart is heavy, Margot. Jasmine here. Cold eyes. Talking about efficiency and moving on. They're planning something. I fear for you. The last message was sent the morning of his accident. Going to shop early. Charles wants to show me something. Love you forever. He'd been trying to warn me. This simple phone, our secret line, had been silenced. I checked my own phone. None of these messages had come through. Someone had blocked them. Someone with access to my account. Charles, who'd helpfully updated my phone plan last Christmas. The pieces weren't just snapping together. They were forming a prison around me. The increased insurance, the forged withdrawals, the clean shop, the rushed death, the secret messages. And then, a new text arrived on my regular phone from the unknown number. The phone in the toolbox. He tried to tell you. They disconnected it. This mysterious ally knew about Ernest's secret phone. Knew where he hid it. Who was this? I replied, my fingers fumbling. Who are you? How do you know this? A friend. One Ernest trusted. You're in danger. They think you know nothing. Keep pretending. A friend. The shop had been Ernest's second home. His customers were his friends. Old Man Henderson? Pete from the hardware store? I had no way of knowing, but this person was my only tether to the truth. I had to see the body. The thought was macabre, horrifying, but the message at the graveside echoed in my skull. That's not me in the casket. The Spring Creek Funeral Home was a modest, somber building. I went the next day, wearing my grief like a cloak. Mr. Albright, the director, was a kind man who had buried my mother. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice soft with practiced sympathy. "What can I do for you?" I need to see Ernest," I whispered, letting tears fill my eyes. Real tears of anguish, but for a different reason now. I didn't get to say a proper goodbye. At the hospital, he was so bandaged. I just need a moment to see his face. He hesitated. "The casket was sealed at the family's request, Mrs. Hayes. Your son Charles was very specific. For preservation, given the nature of the injuries. Sealed. At Charles's request." My blood ran cold. "Please, Mr. Albright. For my peace. You knew Ernest. He'd want me to have this." Reluctance warred with compassion on his face. Finally, he sighed. "Come with me. But quickly. And you mustn't touch anything." He led me to a cold, quiet viewing room. The simple casket sat on a bier. With a soft click, he unlocked and opened the lid. I forced myself to look. The man inside was dressed in Ernest's best suit. He had Ernest's gray hair, his general build. But the face, it was waxy, unnaturally still, the features just off. The nose was slightly broader. The lines around the eyes were wrong. This was a poor copy, a rushed imitation. This was not my husband. A strangled sound escaped my lips. Mr. Albright took it for a sob. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hayes. It's so hard." "Yes," I managed to choke out. "So hard. Thank you. You can close it now." I stumbled out into the spring sunlight, my mind screaming. If that wasn't Ernest in the casket, where was he? Was the text true? "I'm alive." And if he was alive, what had they done with him? And who was the stranger in his grave? The mysterious texts came again that night, as if sensing my crisis. "You saw. You know. The man in the casket is a John Doe from the city morgue. Paid for by Charles. $5,000 cash. Ernest is alive. But he is not safe. They moved him. They needed the death certificate for the insurance. They need you compliant to get the money." The horror was now a living thing in my chest. My sons hadn't just wished their father dead, they had faked his death. They had stolen a body, committed fraud on a monumental scale. For $65,000? It seemed both too much and too little for such evil. The next message was a command. Go to the county land records office. Look up the shop property. See what changed 4 weeks ago. The following morning, I told Doris I was going to visit a friend out of town. Instead, I drove to the county seat. In the quiet, dusty records office, I found the file for our property. There it was, a transaction recorded 4 weeks prior, a quitclaim deed, transferring Ernest's ownership of the bicycle shop to Hayes Family Holdings, LLC. The signature was a shaky forgery of Ernest's name. The notary was a name I didn't recognize. They weren't just after the insurance. They were methodically stripping his assets, while he was, where? Alive, but not safe. I drove home in a trance. As I pulled up to my house, Charles's car was in the driveway. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I took a deep breath, clutching the steering wheel. Pretend. You know nothing. He was in the kitchen, going through the mail. "Mom, there's a letter here from the insurance company. Looks like the payout is being processed." He held it up, a smile on his face. "See? I told you we'd take care of it." "That's wonderful," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I poured a glass of water, my back to him, to hide the tremor in my hands. Have you been to the shop lately?" I keep thinking I should go sort through his things. His demeanor changed instantly. A subtle tightening. No, Mom. It's too soon. And it's not safe. The structure might be unsound after the accident. I've hired a guy to board it up. To keep me out. Oh, of course. You're right. He stayed for lunch, talking about Jasmine, about the market, a stream of normalcy that felt like a stage play. Every bite of food tasted like ash. This man across from me, whose diapers I had changed, whose childhood laughter had filled this house, was a stranger. A monster in my son's skin. After he left, the final, most terrifying text arrived. They're moving him tonight. The old Miller farm. The abandoned dairy barn. Midnight. If you want to see your husband alive, come alone. Tell no one. The Miller farm. 10 miles out of town, fallen into ruin years ago. A perfect, isolated place to hide a man you've supposedly buried. The choice was no choice at all. I would go. I had to see. Was it a trap? Perhaps. But the person sending these messages had given me nothing but truth so far. As dusk fell, I moved through my house like a ghost. I took Ernest's old tire iron from the garage, a solid, familiar weight in my hand. I wrote a note for Doris and sealed it in an envelope. If I don't call you by 9 a.m. tomorrow, give this to Sheriff Miller. Inside, I outlined everything. The texts, the fake body, the forged deeds. Then I waited, watching the clock tick toward midnight, toward the unraveling of all the lies, toward a confrontation in the dark with the sons I had raised, and the husband I had mourned but might still save. The truth was waiting in a crumbling barn. And I was ready to drag it, kicking and screaming, into the light. The phone call from Charles was a spider's thread, sticky with false alarm. I could hear the strain beneath his words, the frantic need to get me to a controlled location. Henry's house. No doubt the methanol was already measured out, waiting for my morning coffee. I can't come right now, Charles, I said, my voice a careful imitation of weary confusion. Doris is coming over to help me with some of your father's things. She'll be here any minute. A sharp silence on the other end. Cancel it. This is more important. I can't. She's already on her way. Tell me what's happened. He scrambled, his lie unprepared. It's Henry. He's had a breakdown. He's talking crazy, saying things about Dad. You need to be here to calm him down. Talking crazy. The irony was a bitter pill. They were spinning their own narrative of instability, ready to use it against us both. I'll come as soon as Doris leaves, I promised, and hung up before he could protest. I wasn't waiting for Doris. I was waiting for Sergeant O'Connell. He'd promised they would move at first light. As the sky lightened from charcoal to ash, I saw the unmarked police cars pull up silently, one by one, down the street. Stephen Callahan got out of one and gave me a brief nod from my window. This was it. The plan was twofold. A team would go to Henry's house to intercept Charles. Another, with the medical examiner and a court order, would go directly to the cemetery. The exhumation had to happen now, before my sons could somehow interfere. I got into the back of Sergeant O'Connell's car, a blanket over my knees though I wasn't cold. I was burning with a cold fire. "You're sure you want to be there, Mrs. Hayes?" the sergeant asked, his eyes gentle in the rearview mirror. "I need to see their faces," I said simply. We drove to Henry's modern condo, a sleek box of glass and steel that felt alien in our humble town. As we approached, we saw Charles's car parked haphazardly in the driveway, the driver's door still open. He'd been in a hurry. Police surrounded the building. Through the large front window, I could see Charles pacing, gesticulating wildly at Henry, who sat slumped at a table, his head in his hands. They looked like men whose carefully laid house of cards was trembling in a sudden breeze. Sergeant O'Connell knocked, a loud, authoritative rap. Charles froze mid-step. Henry's head snapped up. Through the glass, Charles's eyes met mine. In that split second, I saw the boy he had been vanish completely, replaced by a trapped animal, all cunning and fear. Then his expression shifted to a performative, wounded confusion. He pasted on the mask of the concerned son and opened the door. "Officers? Mom. What's going on?" His voice was the perfect blend of bafflement and worry. "Charles Hayes, Henry Hayes," Sergeant O'Connell said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You are under arrest for the suspected murder of Ernest Hayes, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." The words washed over them. Henry began to sob, real, ragged sobs of terror. Charles's facade cracked. "This is insane. Murder? Our own father died of a heart attack. Mom, tell them. You're confused, you're not well." I stepped forward, out of the shadow of the officers. I looked at my firstborn, at the man who had planned his father's poisoning over breakfast coffee. "I am perfectly well, Charles. And I have heard your voice planning it. I have seen the photos of you buying the poison. Your father was perfectly healthy. You killed him for money." His face contorted, not with guilt, but with rage. The mask shattered. That money was rightfully ours. He was sitting on it like a miser while we were drowning. He never helped us. He was a failure, and he was holding us back. The words hung in the crisp morning air, a vile confession. The officers moved in, reading them their rights again as they handcuffed them. Henry offered no resistance, collapsing into his tears. Charles fought, spitting venom until they secured him. As they were led to the squad cars, Charles twisted to look back at me, his eyes full of a hatred so pure it stole my breath. "You'll regret this, you old bitch. You'll die alone." I didn't flinch. "I've been alone since the day you decided your father was worth more dead than alive." They were taken away. The silence they left behind was immense. I didn't go to the cemetery. Some truths are too stark to witness firsthand. Stephen went, representing Ernest's interests. Later, he called me. The exhumation was done. The initial tests, the medical examiner said, strongly indicated the presence of a toxic alcohol. The formal autopsy would confirm it, but the truth was no longer in doubt. The news exploded through Spring Creek like the bomb that never was. The town reeled. The kindly bicycle repairman, murdered. His successful sons, the monsters. The quiet wife, the avenger. I became a figure of pity, awe, and gossip, but I hardly noticed. I was navigating a new landscape, one defined by legal proceedings and a vast, hollow quiet in my house. The district attorney, armed with Stephen's evidence, built an ironclad case. The taped confessions were the damning centerpiece. Faced with the audio, Henry broke first, agreeing to a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Charles. He confessed to everything: the pressure, the planning, the purchase of the methanol, the forgery of the documents. He said it was Charles's idea, that Charles had masterminded it all, driven by his debts and Jasmine's avarice. He was still guilty, but his cooperation sealed Charles's fate. Charles maintained his innocence to the end, a pathetic, snarling performance that convinced no one. Jasmine, when questioned, claimed total ignorance and filed for divorce before the ink was dry on the arrest report. The trial was a blur of painful details. Hearing the medical examiner describe the effects of methanol poisoning, the blurred vision, the agony, the slow shutdown, was a fresh torture. But I sat through it, my back straight, my eyes dry. I was there for Ernest. The verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts for Charles. Henry, with his plea, received a longer sentence than he'd hoped for, but shorter than his brothers. They would both spend decades behind bars. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps. The reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Stephen stood beside me, a solid, silent support. The sun was shining, absurdly bright. "What will you do now, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked quietly. I looked down the street toward the outskirts of town, where the old bicycle shop stood silent. "I'm going to open the shop," I said. The idea had come to me in the night, a small, clear light in the darkness. Not to fix bikes. Maybe a community space. A place for people to talk, to mend other things. A place with his name on it. Stephen smiled, a real, warm smile. He'd like that. I went back to the house. My house. It was still full of memories, but the poison was leaching out. I began the slow process of removing traces of my sons. I packed away their childhood things, not with bitterness, but with a profound, aching sadness for the boys they once were, and the men they chose not to become. The insurance money came through. It felt like blood money, tainted. I didn't want it. I consulted a lawyer and, with Ernest's steadfast love of our community in mind, used it to establish a fund. The Ernest Hayes Memorial Fund would provide small grants to tradespeople in Spring Creek to help them buy tools, learn new skills, keep their own shops alive. It was a way to turn their crime into something that honored his life. One afternoon, months later, I was in the shop, cleaning decades of dust. The bell over the door jingled, the old one, its sound unchanged. It was Doris, with a pot of stew. "Thought you could use a proper meal," she said, her eyes kind. We sat on two upturned crates. As we ate, she said, "The town, they talk, you know. They say you're the strongest woman they've ever met." I shook my head, looking at Ernest's workbench, the ghost of his hands still on the tools. "I'm not strong, Doris. I was just loved. Truly, deeply loved by a good man. That kind of love. It doesn't die when the person does. It becomes a kind of armor. And a compass." And it was true. The love I had shared with Ernest, forged in simplicity and fidelity, had been the one thing my son's greed could not corrupt, could not steal. It had been my lifeline through betrayal, my weapon against lies, and now, it was the foundation upon which I would rebuild. The story of Margot Hayes wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of a love so real it could outlast even death, and a truth so powerful it could bring down a house built on lies. I was 66. I had lost my husband and my sons. But I had found myself. And in the quiet of the shop, with the scent of oil and old wood, I could almost feel him smiling. The quiet of my house is different now. It's not the silence of absence, but the quiet of a soul at rest. 5 years have bleached my hair to the color of winter clouds, but inside, I feel a clarity I never knew before. My mornings begin in Ernest's garden, his shop transformed. The scent of damp earth and blooming roses has replaced the smell of grease and metal. My hands, once used to sewing and housework, now plant and prune. They are creating life from the very ground where his life was plotted to end. There's a poetry in that he would have loved. Stephen comes every Wednesday, as reliable as the sunrise. We sit on the porch with our coffee. He no longer brings case files. He brings stories of his grandchildren, and news from the foundation. We have become anchors for each other in a world that can still feel unmoored. The Ernest Hayes Foundation is my greatest solace. It took the blood money, the $65,000 that cost my husband his life, and turned it into a tool for healing. We've helped a woman in the next county prove her nephew was siphoning her savings for drugs. We provided a lawyer for a young man whose sister tried to have him committed to get their parents' farm. Each case is a fresh wound, but each victory is a stitch in the fabric of justice, mending what was torn. I don't read Henry's letters anymore. The shoebox in the hall closet is their tomb. The boy he was is buried in my heart, under layers of happier memories. The man he became is a ghost I choose not to feed. The town of Spring Creek still talks. I hear the whispers sometimes at the market. There's Margot Hayes. Can you imagine? Her own sons. Some look at me with pity, others with a kind of fearful respect. I've learned to meet their gazes evenly. My story is no longer a secret shame. It's a public testament. A warning that evil can wear a familiar face, and a lesson that courage can bloom at any age. On Sundays, I cut the best blooms from the garden and walk to the cemetery. The inscription on Ernest's headstone says it all. Beloved husband. Betrayed father. Honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him about the foundation. We helped another one this week, my love. A widow from Oak Hill. Her story was so like ours it made my heart ache. But she's safe now. Because of you. Because you were wise enough to be afraid, and brave enough to act. The wind rustles the old oak leaves, and I feel, rather than hear, his answer. It's in the peace that settles over me, a warmth that has nothing to do with the sun. The reporter for the documentary asked me what I'd learned. Family isn't a license to harm, I told her, the camera's eye unwavering. Love should be a sanctuary, not a weapon. And justice. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. It's about saying that a good man's life mattered more than a pile of cash. Life, in its simplest form, is enough. The hum of the refrigerator, the whistle of the kettle, the satisfying scratch of a pen as I write thank you notes to the foundation's donors. It is a life stripped bare of pretense, built on the bedrock of a terrible truth, but it is my life. Authentic. Owned. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, I think of Charles's final letter. The desperation in it was real. The regret, perhaps, was too. But some paths, once taken, lead only to a dead end. His did. I mourn the wrong turn, not the destination he chose. As for me, my path led here. To this porch. To this garden. To this quiet, powerful legacy. I am 71 years old. I have loved and I have lost in the most profound ways possible. I have stared into the abyss of human greed and did not blink. And I have learned that the most powerful force in the world is not money, or even vengeance. It is the quiet, stubborn insistence on truth, fueled by a love that refuses to be corrupted. Tomorrow, Stephen will come. We'll have coffee. We'll talk. We'll plant some new lavender. The sun will rise over Spring Creek, as it always does, painting my garden in gold. And I will be here. Living proof that even from the deepest betrayal, a life of meaning and peace can grow.